Welcome, travelers of Middle-earth, to another journey into the heart of Tolkien's legendarium. Today, we unearth an ancient rift buried deep in the history of the Free Peoples, a mistrust that shaped the fate of Middle-earth for centuries. The Dwarves and the Elves, two of the greatest races crafted by the will of Ilúvatar and the labor of Aule, were never truly at peace. But what lies beneath their enduring suspicion and rivalry? Was it simple pride and cultural difference, or was there something far darker at work? To understand this enmity, we must look back to the First Age, when the world was still young and the lands of Beleriand stretched wide beneath the light of the two trees. The Dwarves, first awakened in the deep places of Middle-earth by Aule, before even the Elves had stirred, were a people of craft and stone. When the Elves emerged and were led to Valinor, the Dwarves remained in the shadows, carving their halls beneath the mountains. It was not until the Noldor returned in exile that the two races first met. At first, there was a kind of cautious respect, especially between the Noldor and the Dwarves of Belegost and Nogrod, who aided the Elves in their war against Morgoth. However, from the very beginning, a wound was sewn into their relationship, one that would fester for ages. The Dwarves, masters of metal and stone, revered the works of their hands above all things. The Elves, who had beheld the light of the trees, valued beauty and art in ways the Dwarves could scarcely understand. And then there was Thingol of Doriath, a king whose arrogance and greed would set in motion one of the greatest betrayals in Middle-earth's history. Thingol, enchanted by the shimmering depths of a single jewel, the Silmaril wrested from Morgoth's iron crown, demanded a setting of unmatched craft, and for this task he turned to the finest smiths in Middle-earth, the Dwarves of Nogrod. What happened next would ignite a hatred that would never fully die. The Dwarves of Nogrod, master artisans and jewelsmiths, toiled long over their work. They set the Silmaril in a necklace of unparalleled craftsmanship, the Nauglamir, a magnificent relic originally wrought by their ancestors for Finrod Felagund, the elven king of Nargothrond. This necklace, adorned with countless gems from Valinor, was already a treasure beyond compare. But now, with the Silmaril at its heart, it became the greatest work of dwarven craft ever made. When the work was done, the dwarf gazed upon it and saw not only the labor of their hands, but something far greater, something that should, by rights, belong to them. For the dwarves, the Silmaril was not merely a jewel of radiant beauty. It was a prize that transcended all mortal wealth, a thing of legend that had been placed into their hands by fate itself. And yet, they knew that it would be taken from them. Thingol had commissioned the work, and he would not part with the Silmaril, no matter the price they might name. The dwarves, proud and possessive of their greatest creation, laid claim to the Nauglamir. They argued that their skill had transformed the Silmaril into a new treasure, one born of their labor. But Thingol, a king mighty and proud, scorned them. The words exchanged between them were filled with arrogance and wrath. Thingol, ever haughty, insulted the dwarves, belittling their stature and dismissing their claim. But in doing so, he underestimated the pride and fury of the Naugrim. The Dwarves of Nogrod, enraged at this insult, slew him in his own halls. Thus, the first great betrayal between elves and dwarves was written in blood. But the tale did not end there. When news of Thingol's murder reached Menegroth, his people rose in vengeance. They pursued the dwarves, cutting them down as they fled, and few returned to Nogrod to tell the tale. Yet those who did spoke not of their own guilt, but of elvish treachery. In their eyes, the elves had stolen the Nauglamir from them, denying them the honor of possessing the Silmaril. And so, the dwarves, in their anger, mustered a host and marched upon Doriath. What followed was a horror that would stain the pages of history, the sack of Menegroth. The dwarves, driven by their wrath and their hunger for the Silmaril, laid waste to the halls of Thingol. They slew his kin and looted the treasures of Doriath, taking the Nauglamir for themselves. But as fate would have it, their triumph was short-lived. For as they returned home, the host of Beren, along with the Ents of Osiriand, fell upon them in ambush. Few survived, and the Nauglamir, along with the Silmaril, was returned to Luthien. Yet, despite their defeat, the dwarves of Nogrod never forgot this grievance. In their hearts, the betrayal of Thingol festered like a wound that would not heal. They whispered of the elves' arrogance, of the treasures stolen from them, and of the blood that had been shed. And though the First Age came to ruin, though Beleriand was lost beneath the sea, the memory of that ancient feud lived on. As the ages passed and the world changed, the bitter memory of the sack of Menegroth did not fade. Though the dwarves of Nogrod were lost beneath the waves when Beleriand was sundered, their kin in Khazad-dûm and the halls of the Blue Mountains did not forget. To the dwarves, the treachery of the elves was a wound upon their pride, a betrayal that echoed through the deep places of the world. And the elves in turn looked upon the Norgrim with wariness, recalling the ruin that dwarven greed had wrought upon Doriath. Yet the enmity between the two peoples was not merely sustained by the ghosts of the past. It was fueled by new wounds, fresh betrayals that ensured peace would never truly take root between them. In the Second Age, the fires of mistrust were stoked once more when the elves of Eregion, led by Celebrimbor, forged a rare alliance with the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. This was a time of great prosperity between their peoples. The craftsmen of Khazad-dûm and the Gwaithei Myrdain of Eregion labored side by side, blending the arts of elves and dwarves in a way that had not been seen since the days of Beleriand. The greatest marvel of this union was the forging of the Rings of Power. It was an age when the dwarves and elves worked in harmony, and for a time, the scars of the past seemed as distant as the drowned lands of the First Age. But that illusion of friendship was shattered by the treachery of Sauron. Disguised as Anatar, the Deceiver, he had seduced the elves of Eregion with knowledge and cunning, guiding their hands in the forging of the rings. When his true nature was revealed and the One Ring was made in secret, the elves resisted him. But their defiance came at a terrible cost. Eregion fell beneath the onslaught of Sauron's armies, its forges were destroyed, and Celebrimbor was slain. And where were the dwarves in this hour of ruin? They closed their gates. Khazad-dûm, which had once stood in alliance with Eregion, did not march to its defense. The dwarves sealed the doors of Moria, turning their backs on the elves as Sauron's forces laid waste to Eregion. It was an act born not of malice, but of caution. For the dwarves, though mighty, knew they could not stand against the full power of the Dark Lord. But to the elves who survived, it was abandonment. They saw in it another reason to distrust the dwarves, another proof of their self-interest. And the dwarves, in turn, resented the elves for leading them into an alliance that had nearly brought ruin to their halls. Thus, the fragile trust between them was broken anew, and the old wounds of Menegroth bled once more. The resentment sown in the Second Age carried over into the Third, shaping the course of history and deepening the rift between elves and dwarves. Where once they had worked together, now they stood apart, wary of one another. The dwarves saw the elves as haughty and unreliable, creatures who dealt in beauty and dreams, but whose alliances crumbled in the face of true danger. The elves, in turn, regarded the dwarves as stubborn and greedy, hoarders of wealth who valued their own survival over friendship. There were moments when the old bonds might have been reforged, but time and again fate intervened. One such moment came with the rise of Erebor. In the year 1999 of the Third Age, the dwarves, led by Thrain I, discovered the Arkenstone. A jewel unlike any other, a treasure of indescribable beauty. To the dwarves of Erebor, it was a symbol of their kingship, a heart of the mountain that glowed with the light of their ancestors. Yet, to the elves who later beheld it, there was something unsettling in the way the dwarves revered this stone. To them, it was another sign of the Norgrim's lust for wealth, another example of how treasure could consume them. The divide between the two peoples might have remained no more than distant mistrust had it not been for the arrival of Smaug in 2770 of the Third Age. When the dragon descended upon Erebor in fire and ruin, the dwarves were driven from their halls, cast out into exile. Desperate and wandering, they sought aid where they could find it, and when Thranduil, the elven king of the woodland realm, encountered them in their flight, he did not extend a hand of mercy. Thranduil, wary of dwarven intentions and perhaps mindful of ancient grievances, did not offer refuge. He saw only dwarves weighed down by treasure, clinging to the remnants of their wealth even in ruin, and so he turned them away. To Thorin Oakenshield, the grandson of the exiled King Thror, this was not just a refusal, it was a betrayal. The elves had not struck the blow that destroyed Erebor, but in the eyes of the dwarves they had done something worse. They had stood aside and watched. This wound festered for decades until, at last, Thorin and his company returned to reclaim their homeland. When word spread that Erebor was freed from Smaug's tyranny, Thranduil marched with an army seeking a share of the treasure. But to Thorin there was nothing to discuss. The elves had abandoned the dwarves in their time of need. Why should they now claim any right to the wealth of the mountain? The confrontation that followed at the Lonely Mountain nearly erupted into open war, were it not for the intervention of a greater threat, the approach of Bolg and the legions of orcs from Gundabad. In the Battle of the Five Armies, elves and dwarfs fought side by side, but the old hatred did not vanish. Even as he lay dying, Thorin spoke bitterly of the elves, his pride too great to let go of his grievances. Though peace was made in the end, the scars remained. And so, the tale of mistrust and wounded pride carried on, echoing through the ages. Thus, the long shadow of history stretched into the later years of the Third Age, ensuring that the bond between elves and dwarves remained one of suspicion rather than trust. The mistrust was not born of a single betrayal, nor was it the fault of one race alone. It was a wound cut deep by many blades. Thingol's arrogance, the dwarves' wrath, the sack of Menegroth, the fall of Eregion, the cold rejection of Thorin's exiles, and the greed that clouded the hearts of both peoples in the days of Erebor's restoration. Yet even in the darkest of tales there are glimmers of hope. Though many among elves and dwarves held fast to their old grievances, there were those who defied the bitterness of the past. Legolas and Gimli, the most renowned of these, forged a friendship unlike any before. When the Fellowship of the Ring set out from Rivendell, the elf and the dwarf regarded each other with wariness, each carrying the weight of centuries of strife between their peoples. But through hardship and battle, through laughter and loss, they came to see one another not as enemies, nor even as rivals, but as true friends. It was a friendship that endured beyond the War of the Ring, one that changed the course of history, however subtly. When the war was won and Sauron was cast down, Gimli led a company of dwarves to the glittering caves of Aglarond, where they built a new home for their kind. And Legolas, long tied to the woods of his people, chose instead to walk beside the dwarf. Together they journeyed across Middle-earth, even to the fair lands of Ithilien, where elves and dwarves worked side by side to heal the scars left by war. And in the end, when the days of Middle-earth waned, and the call of the sea grew too strong for Legolas to resist, he built a ship and sailed westward. And it is said that with him went Gimli, son of Gloin, the first and only dwarf to set foot upon the Undying Lands. Perhaps this was Eru's will, that in the twilight of the world one friendship might stand as proof that the old wounds could heal, that even the deepest grudges could be set aside. The past could not be undone, but it did not have to define the future. And so, the tale of the dwarves and the elves is not merely one of mistrust, but of struggle, pride, and, in the end, the hope that two mighty peoples, divided by fate and history, might one day stand as brothers once more. Thus ends our journey through one of the great conflicts of Middle-earth's history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of Tolkien's world, be sure to like and subscribe for more tales from the lands of elves, dwarves, and men. Until next time, may your path be lit by the stars of Elbereth, and may your axes stay ever sharp.